morning, everybody. I am delighted to introduce this morning two prominent Oregon novelists who have been good friends for many years and who are here today to share insights into their craft. Michael Strelow, Michael, raise your hand, is an emeritus professor of English with a long and illustrious career at Willamette University, who is familiar to many of us from his many engaging and inspiring presentations to us prior to his retirement on topics related to modern literature and culture. And now, after retirement, he is one of us. He is also an accomplished novelist whose first novel, The Greening of Ben Brown, was a finalist for the Ken Kesey Novel Prize, and he has since published 3 other novels, including a historical novel about the Oregon brewer Henry Weinart, entitled Henry, a Novel of Beer and Love in the West, 2014. A science fiction novel on AI entitled Some Assembly Required, 2017, which was nominated for an Arthur C. Clarke Award, and the Moby Dick Blues, 2018. He has also published, a long line of stuff, children's poetry, children's books, poetry, short stories, and creative nonfiction in many literary and commercial magazines. Okay, our other guest, Stephen Mayfield, is a retired MD and former professor of neonatal medicine and nutrition at Brown University and the University of Texas in Southwestern in Dallas. He has been writing and publishing novels and short stories for over 50 years. His books include 60 Seconds, a historical novel about the end of World War II, and for this he was a finalist for the 2025 Ernest Hemingway Award. Howling at the Moon, American Book Fest Best Books 2010 selection. Delphic Oracle USA 2022, Chanticleer Mark Twain Grand Prize winner. The Penny Mansions 2023, CIBA, First Place Ribbon, Humor, and Satire, and Treasure of the Blue Whale from 2021, which won the 2021 IBPA Silver Medal. These prominent local authors will present a program, The Jazz of Writing, giving short readings from their new novels, and then they will discuss the writing process, sources of material and research, writing habits, and the creative process from outlining and notebooks to the editing process. Let's give a big welcome to Michael Strelow and Stephen Mayfield.
Excuse me. Thank you all for coming, and we had a little technical glitch here, so I'm going to have to run the slides a little differently. I guess I'm a Luddite as far as these things are concerned, but we're going to do some readings from our most recently released novels. Michael and I became friends through our publisher, Regal House. He is an independent publisher out of North Carolina. Michael's book, John and Julie and Robert, was released in September of last year. My book, 60 Seconds, was released a few months prior to that, and we've been doing a little dog and pony show periodically since then. We're going to start today, and let me get this figured out here. There we go. And we're going to do some short readings. Now, these books both have multiple characters and parallel story arcs, and we're going to discuss that a little bit as we go along. Michael, why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay. Okay, let's see, make sure I'm hooked up here. Lumpy head, this doesn't stay up there very well. Okay. Am I coming out all right? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting that both of our books ended up with these multiple narrators. This book, John, Julie, and Robert, has 3 characters in it. 3 characters who were together as children. Let me see if I fix this a little bit. 3 characters who were Is that better? Three children who were raised on the same street, went to the same kindergarten, went to grade school together. She was brilliant, and she got them doing Shakespeare. She got them doing Shakespeare when they were 9 years old, but she didn't tell them, and it was okay with the two guys because it had swords and they could stab each other and whack each other over the head. And so it's a story of friendship and idealism. And if you're going to write a book about, we'll talk more about this process later, but if you're going to write a book about idealism or ecology, or you have some kind of agenda, you need it has to have a vehicle. Here's the vehicle you can see is the leaf blower comes into play in a number of ways. And what I'm going to do is read a little bit about John first of all. John is, in fact, the principal. At one point, I wanted this book to be called John Quixote. And the publisher thought that was funny, but no. And publishers get to decide on cover pictures and titles eventually. So John Quixote didn't happen, but John is an idealist and an activist and a civic activist, and he has a bunch of stunts, a bunch of encounters, and we'll talk more about the beginning of this book and the kind of encounters in my life that led to the leaf blower metaphor, if you like. But John, the part I'm going to read now, that has decided to encounter a bunch of leaf blowers who are working on an estate. And he's going to encounter these guys, and he takes a plastic bag and fills it with fireplace ashes. Important, regular fireplace ashes. And straps it to his body and goes where the leaf blowers are. Okay, let's see what John does. He stepped out of his car. Again, patted the vest, took out a tiny, sharp penknife, checked for traffic, crossed the street. Standing on the sidewalk, he surveyed the industry of the three men. The two leaf blowers flanked the mower and then worked their way around the house to both sides. They would meet, he supposed, in the back, and it was there he would do it. He hoped that would be perfect, and he didn't need perfect. Just the two blowers. The worker with the mower barely noticed John as he made his way up the drive and around the back of the house. There were two blowers there, indeed, coming closer together as they worked the beds, rooting out the offending detritus in full-throated song. John made his way between them and paused. Neither man saw him at first. My camouflage tweed, thought John fleetingly, and he placed himself between the blowers, and they came together across the back of the house. The house itself lifted the wind from the machine so that a tiny storm swirled up the backside of the house. And one man saw it and brought down. Yeah, hang on. Droopy Mike syndrome. Given my name, that's okay. Yeah. Sorry. All right. Yeah. So it's just holler when it gets down below my chin. The house itself lifted the wind from the machine so that a tiny storm swirled up the backside of the house. Then one man saw him and throttled down, but it was too late. John opened his vest and slit both plastic bags in two quick moves and emptied the contents into the blower winds. The fine gray dust rose like the breath of all the gods John was calling up out of the earth. Hey, what are you doing? What is that stuff? Hey! One workman dropped his blower muzzle. John spun to complete the emptying of the bag and saw that there, away from the house, was a swimming pool in aquamarine serenity. The dust continued to rise on the wind from the blower, still running wide open. Both men approached John like pinchers in a military maneuver, one blower efficiently blasting air up the side of the house. What the hell is that for? What did you just do? John shouted over the idling machines, "Oh, my wife! Oh, and also my father, they both wanted to be cast abroad in the world. And I just thought, one blower revved as the worker jerked to life nervously. The other worker dropped the nozzle, slipped out of his machine shoulder harness, and set the blower down. What did you just toss in the air? I just told you, John replied quietly. I lost my father some years ago, and my wife recently, they expressed, but he couldn't finish. The worker without a blower grabbed John by the shoulder, straightened him up, nearly lifting him off the ground. What, was that ashes? Was that their ashes? Oh God, what the hell kind of stuff is that? I'm cleaning up the language a little bit. What the hell kind of stuff is that? He clasped his gloved hand over his mouth, letting John half free. The other man was rapidly backing up to get out of the slowly descending cloud of ash. He revved the machine, pointing the nozzle up to try to blow away the floating cloud, but only caused it to swirl and stir like one liquid added into another. John, now free of all but one fistful of his shirt, gave the remaining ash bags a shudder to set them loose, and they covered the front, and the blower man backed up and released John. Are you crazy? Are you nuts? Is that really dead people? I can't believe that. And then to the other guy, he shouted over the blower. The second guy continued blowing, trying to blow away the ashy corpses let loose in his face by this crazy person. Hey, Tom, call the police. I'll keep this guy here. Call the office. Ask what we should do. And all this shouted so loud, the mower guy appeared around the corner, coming to see what all the shouting was about. The ash settled on, John thought, the righteous and the wicked alike. And clearly by now the swimming pool with its crust of putative cremains. Okay. So that's one of my people.
60 Seconds takes place in the last minute before midnight and the first 15 minutes after midnight on May 7, 8, 1945, which was Victory in Europe Day. And it follows 9 characters in parallel story arcs, each of the first 6 chapters covering 10 seconds, with the last chapter, chapter 7, covering the first 15 minutes of actual Victory in Europe Day. These 9 characters seem disconnected at the beginning, but as the book proceeds, it becomes clear that they're inextricably linked, and by the end, there's no more than 1 degree of separation between any 2 of them. They are on both sides of the conflict. They are in 3 different locations on both sides of the Atlantic. Now, each of these chapters consists of a vignette from each of the 9 characters, which is occurring simultaneously. And we'll talk a little bit about how I tried to connect those and keep the reader on the timeline correctly. Each of the vignettes is about 700, 800 words, but I've cobbled together much shorter versions just to give you all an idea of these characters as we begin this book, who they are, and to actually keep you from walking out because it's too long. So, Chapter 1, 7 May 1945, 1759 to 1759:10 Eastern Standard Time, 23:59 to 23:59:10 Central European Time. Farley. From his glass-walled broadcast booth, perched on the side of a temporary stage in Times Square, Farley Saxted watched and listened to the girl with reddish hair as she stood before a phalanx of microphones. She was talented, and at an age when the woman she would become was still hidden by a schoolgirl's pleated plaid skirt, bobby socks and loafers, and a spray of faint freckles around her nose. Already 15 seconds into her performance, Farley was inclined to let her rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner stand on its own. The girl was an excellent singer and, better yet, had chosen to move through the song quickly, without unnecessary runs or notes held too long. The broadcast enclosure was tiny, with enough space for only 2 compartments, and as the young woman continued to sing, the sound engineer motioned at Farley through the glass separating their cubicles, one hand flapping the earpiece of his headset, the other flapping like the bill of a quacking duck. His lips moved, the words muted but unmistakable. Say something. Selma. The radio in the parlor was on, a woman singing the Star-Spangled Banner. She sounded young, her voice clear. She'd been singing for 15 or 20 seconds. I had a good voice too. Mrs. Burdico picked me to sing the solo. Selma had frozen that day, terrified by the expectant faces in the audience waiting for her to perform. Eventually, Mrs. Burdico, her 6th grade music teacher with the kind eyes, had emerged from the wing and gently led her off the stage. The food Selma had scattered about was gone, the scramble abating as some of her cats made for one of several pans filled with malodorous sand, others slipping through the dog door, a few seeking privacy in corners, and then defecating on the kitchen floor. "No, no, dears," Selma softly scolded the squatting cats. She retrieved a paper towel, sank to her knees on the cracked linoleum, and began to clean up the feces, nose wrinkled, a pinched expression forming when the song coming from her radio in the next room was joined by the voice. It is a moment of both joy and sadness, of profound gratitude and profound regret. Jenny. As 6 o'clock approached and afternoon in New York City eased into evening, there were more tears than cheers coming from the crowd gathered in a plaza created by the junction of Broadway, 7th Avenue, and 42nd Street. They cried with relief and joy, with longing and grief. Jenny did not cry. She could not. Her voice might fail if she cried, and she'd vowed to keep it strong for the radio microphones, for America and the world, for Jimmy. She'd practiced over and over, determined that her rendition would not exceed 1 minute and 30 seconds, that she would reach her final held note at 6 p.m., coinciding with midnight in Europe and the official end of war with Hitler's Germany. But the mayor's wink before she began, her name echoing across Times Square from the public address system, and the imposing cluster of microphones at center stage had been momentarily unnerving. She'd frozen, losing 3 seconds before the reverent, upturned faces in the crowd restored her confidence, and she was able to begin, her voice steady and assured, even though this wasn't Yankee Stadium on a balmy Wednesday night in September, even though it was Times Square. The war was about to officially end, and Jenny Doyle from Queens had been picked to sing the national anthem live to thousands amassed in the plaza and via radio to millions across the world. So Kurt Vonnegut wrote a primer to a collection of short stories one time, and the first thing that he had, it was a primer for writers, and the first, whoops. Oh, don't do that. And the first thing that he had on there is don't waste the reader's time. And in a sense, then we think don't confuse the reader, and that's where trying to keep these parallel story arcs straight for the reader. How do we do that without confusing them? And Mike talked about that a little bit with John and Julie and Robert.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things I did is, and I was expecting trouble from a publisher about this, is I have multiple narrative methods. Right at the beginning, there's a little paragraph of each chapter, which I was thinking of as a Greek chorus. This sort of disembodied voice who could come swooping down and comment on what's going on and make jokes and provide background and history. And I have letters and I have plays and all kinds of ways of going about this, confusing the reader. So my job was to find ways to link them together. When we talked about the jazz of writing, this is one of the ways, is one thing has to be compatible with the next. I think it was either Miles Davis or Louis Armstrong or someone who said, jazz without ideas is just noise. So the ideas in that way hold things together.
For 60 seconds, I used the fact that the characters were either in Times Square listening to this girl sing the Star-Spangled Banner, or they were in a place where there was a radio that was playing the song. And when I started to write this, I actually sang the Star-Spangled Banner and recorded it, and then I went through and I blocked out the time, because each of these chapters was covering 10 seconds, and I needed to know what fragment of lyric was being sung during those 10 seconds, and then make sure that that was consistent throughout each of these story arcs. And by doing that, I hope to keep the reader, grounded in the fact that these stories were, or these vignettes were taking place simultaneously in time. And so that was my little trick, and probably it's based on my background as a researcher and in science, where composition became very important and structure became very important in developing research protocols and writing research papers. Michael's a literary writer, and I've become a yarn spinner as time goes on. So he talks about Greek choruses, and I talk about composition. Let's go to our next set of readings here. And actually, I was supposed to put this up. Here we go. Let's go to our next set of readings. Let's hear about
The
Julie.
readings just before that, in fact, have to do a great deal with these three. They all become engaged in the civic duty of dealing with pollution, of getting organized, coming together for various reasons, engaging in the civility of making sure the environment is clean, and a number of other things. In fact, Julie does it in her form of idealism. Julie is a woman of international mystery. She was a brilliant child reading Shakespeare. The fact that her name is Julie and her last name is Montague, and I know I have them swapped, as in Juliet, is part of a structure, a structure that we're going to talk about later, how you do this associative business, how you find kind of a richness or to your meanings. But Julie disappears for long lengths of time, comes back to town where the other two, one working for an editor, John, and Robert in his father's law firm, doing their idealism, basing their lives on a kind of a service to everyone else who's alive around you. And Julie has gone off and become this international girl of history, and she writes back these letters to the boys, and they sit in a bar and read them to each other. And in this is mentioned the maple tree. Much of what they did together as kids, 7, 8, 9, was under this maple tree. It's where the Shakespeare plays were. It's where they sat and parsed the world and talked about things and talked about being humans. And of course, she was their light and brilliance and this model for their own intelligence in the world. And she brought them along, and they were all vaguely in love with each other in that potent childhood way, which mutates in the story as it goes along. So she writes a letter back. Another thing mentioned in here is the Black Barn, and I'll get to this later. But the Black Barn is a place of eminence, a place where you go, where you find out who you are. And I'll come back to this later when we talk about the things that built this. So she writes a letter, and she's writing from Kazakhstan. Well, this becomes clear. From Uzbekistan. She says, "My dear lovely boys," and remember they're sitting reading these to each other in a bar. "My dear lovely boys, I'm writing you while waiting in the Tashkent metro station in Uzbekistan. I walked underground, not very deep though, and then I found myself in another world. You know, the one we used to talk about, those hot afternoons under the maple tree, where nothing is the same. Nothing is expected or regular anymore. I think, John, you were there when you lowered yourself into the Black Barn's maw where Robert couldn't go and I wouldn't. Alice's rabbit hole. Not as if writers didn't know about this hole all along. The Buddha, Ovid's Metamorphosis, Jules Verne hole to the center of the earth, and then Alice. And don't forget Proust and Kafka's trippy excursions into their own navels, where they found castles and penal colonies, cockroaches, madeleines that exploded with memorial scent. That same old, same old. You two, oh, you two, look around with me. Tiles in here depicting history and space exploration, and hopes burgeoning in light with columns like the atria of our hearts. just being down in this glorious hole in the ground reminds me of us. The farther I am from Benetton, that's their hometown, the closer, by the way, it's in Oregon, and it's invented. The farther I am from Benetton, the closer I am to you two, my great and abiding loves, my cohorts in the act of loving being alive. Under the generous and breathing apple tree, always watching out for us. From this exquisitely ornate hole in the ground, I can almost reach out and touch you two. Hear the silly and gorgeous sense we made of our children's world. What would I have done without you two? Would I, without your ears, your brilliant acquiescence to my mad self-indulgence, would I have rotted from the inside like a bad apple picked too early? My joys and saviors, I'm sending you my delight in this particular cave I find myself in, though there have been others just as worthy. One had death in it. One, the beauty of my own fear, so perfect that it filled me, so that there was no other sensations but the thoroughness of that fear. Once in life, we should all experience that, but alas, you can't go there on purpose, I found. You can't skydive your way into it, can't thrill-seek this, because the agency can't be your own. You have to be taken there by circumstances. I think that maybe being stalked and eaten by a polar bear might qualify. In any case, do not try this at home. I'm waiting for any underground train that goes anywhere it goes. Doesn't matter, since I have no destination. Stop snickering, you two, both of you rat bastards. I can hear you repeating parts of that last sentence and looking at each other with your boy snicker faces. Shame on you, both of you. And it doesn't matter at all that I asked for it, set myself up, gave you the ammunition for your snicker pop guns. It turns out, and I want you both to write this down for future reference, that no destination is as legitimate a destination as anywhere else. And now that I have learned the sojourner's trick of financing my wanderings and peregrinations while in progress, woo, there exists a slew of 18th century novels in those last words, peregrine pickle indeed. I can float above and underground to my heart's content. Snicker again if you must, you, especially you, John, and your thinly disguised contempt for any form of the heart's content. But the engine of my travels is my own great content. Hearts, okay, with my discontent. Ironies are our ice cream. Remember that? That was, if I remember right, you, Robert, who joined these two unlikely bits. The law is the perfect place for that combination. And so I write you from a place of great beauty and send it to the great beauty that I consider to be the both of you two. I sit here and imagine you both searing the night like comets. Both of you sitting in the bar we used to frequent that seemed always in transition from one bar fad to another, with ferns stuck in the cracks to cover up the construction mess. As well as the night sky, I see you two there. And I forbid you to talk without me being there. And I will be there. Soon enough, when my mojo fades, my journey through irony wears thin. Not yet, boys. Not yet. I still feel a kind of water slapping against the sides of my boat, waves of discontent that shove me further out from shore. But there I still float. I think because you two gave me the boat and cheered me when I pushed off from shore. I send all my love again and again. The maple tree still watches over me, all of us. May more than one of those whirly seed pears in the fall land on each of your heads with my blessing and benediction. Yours from underground, in the underground of excellent Uzbekistan. Julie.
I'm going to read from for the next vignettes from the next three characters, who are Franz Stangl, Jimmy Doyle, and Gosia Pietkowski. In this book, there's one character who actually existed. Franz Stangl was the commandant at Sobibor for a few months in 1942 and was one of the more notorious members of the SS during the Second World War. Stangl. The radio was on in the guard room outside the cell block, the sound carrying through an open door. The guards played it day and night, turning up the volume if he complained. Fortunately, they mostly listened to music rather than news reports, romantic ballads from Frank Sinatra, wistful lilts from Dinah Shore, jazzy instrumentals by the Benny Goodman Quartet or Glenn Miller's Orchestra. A few minutes earlier, a tune by Miller's band, In the Mood, had played. Miller had been a favorite of Stengel's before the war, and even though the SS officer publicly shared the Fuhrer's disapproval of American music, he'd privately mourned when the trombonist's plane went missing. After In the Mood ended, the guards had picked up the CBS radio feed, and Now a Female Singer was a few measures into the national anthem of the United States. Suddenly the voice of the famous American broadcaster, Farley Saxted, intruded upon her performance. It will be a moment of both joy and sadness, of profound gratitude and profound regret. Stengel didn't understand much English, but Saxted's tone was unmistakable. It was the voice of a gracious victor. The former SS officer scowled in the darkness of his tiny cell. Taunt the conquered, the Führer had encouraged his disciples. Be proud in victory. And Stengel had gladly obeyed the directive, taking great pride in his work on behalf of the Reich, particularly at Sobibor. Jimmy. Jimmy was on the return leg of his nightly walk, Fuchs Airfield still an eighth of a mile away. The road was dark, save beams of light from the base spotlights that illuminated a sharp leftward bend 50 yards ahead. He looked at the watch purchased in Nuremberg from a German wearing a once expensive but now tattered suit. It had cost him $1 and a pack of cigarettes. Es ist ein Stava, the old man told him, weeping when he handed over the timepiece. The brand name had meant nothing to Jimmy. He'd wanted the watch because of its luminous hands, both now pointed up. He could hear Jenny's voice coming from the distant loudspeakers. You should hear my sisters sing, he'd bragged to his buddies on the Daisy May. Mark my words, one day Jenny's going to be on the radio. And now it was true. Her broadcasted performance enriching a night otherwise eerily quiet, her mezzo-soprano voice exactly as he remembered. He stopped to listen, his eyes welling with tears, not for the anthem or the nation, but for the little sister he'd not seen in so long. Her delivery of melody and lyrics were assured, no longer tentative in the shy, breathy way of a girl, but with the confidence of a woman. Indeed, while Jimmy Doyle had been away transforming from a boy to a man, his little sister had apparently grown up too. Gosia. Gosia Pietkowski grasped the bedsheets, nodded to the footboard, closed her eyes, lifted her shoulders, and pushed as hard as she could. The baby refused to move. Stubborn, like Antony. She wished Antony were there. Her husband would have found a way to distract her, to make the insistent pain less ferocious. An honest man, he was a good liar when a good lie was needed. At Sobibor, he'd lied to her every day until the revolt, reassuring his wife each morning that the Americans would soon liberate them. Don't give up, Gosia. They will be here today, he'd promised, pivoting when evening came and SS guards still manned their machine guns in the watchtowers. Don't worry, the Americans will be here tomorrow. The radio on the dresser was playing, a girl singing. The voice of the famous broadcaster Farley Saxted underlined hers. He spoke in English Gosia could not understand, although she recognized the gravity and portent in his tone. The war in Europe, although not officially over, was now history. The death camp at Sobibor, like her last contraction, was a memory too, and she once more wished that Antony were at her bedside, knowing what he would tell her. Don't worry, Gosia. The baby will be here today. So, we're going to talk a little bit about, if I can get this to work here, a little bit about where the ideas for these books came from.
Okay. Mine has three sources, and they're Two of them are pretty obvious, and the third one is that black barn. I'm originally from Wisconsin. Yeah, this is. My head is way too lumpy for this. Let me see if I can't get this up where it'll stay up here, and this comes down here.
You're good.
Are we better now? Okay. All right. I'm not hearing anything, so. Okay, how about that? Is that all right?
Don't try this at home.
Yeah, I usually sit in the back because there's a certain amount of distortion from this machinery on popping all together, and this shouldn't pop because there we go. Get it off to the side a little bit. Yeah. The sources of the material. One was, and this one's fairly obvious, I live on a hill, so each house is slightly lower than the next one, and I'm in the middle between two houses. And the guy on the high side hired somebody to go on his roof and fix it and get it ready for moss treatment. And the guy I was sitting in my living room and I heard this sort of roar, and I went outside, and the guy was walking down his roof with a leaf blower, blasting everything off his roof onto the side of my house and my windows. And since my house was slightly lower, all the crap from his roof was coming onto my roof. So I went out there and I yelled. I said, "Hey, what are you doing? Big cloud." And I learned later, I have a fish pond in the backyard, that it completely coated the fish pond too. Completely coated the fish pond too. And so I yelled, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he stopped, took off his earphones, and I said, what are you doing? There's a big cloud coming at my house and my roof. And I swear, this is what he said: "It's okay, I'm almost done." The logic of the machine.
And you were only just starting, because that was your idea.
Okay, second versions of this. The guy on the low side of the house. Now this one short this one up, but he had hired a bunch of people, and the guy was standing in his garden blowing everything into my driveway where my freshly washed car sat. And I thought, let me see what I can do with this. I walked out and I said, "Hey, wait a second. If I pay you $20, will you just blow it all back in his yard?" And the guy said, "Sure." So there's the logic of it. Now, the third source of all of this was that black barn out of my backyard in Wisconsin, a small town called South Milwaukee, 30 miles south of Milwaukee on Lake Michigan. It was an old dairy, had been dairy, and back through my backyard there was a field, there was a cemetery, and there was also a collapsed dairy barn. Now, a dairy barn in Wisconsin has a particular structure. It's Lannon stone. It's limestone, stacked limestone. And that's the base of it, and then it has windows in it, and then there's the stuff on top. Well, the thing had collapsed. And now this was a neighborhood of old houses and things, and we were told as children, of course, don't go in there. Don't go down in there. That thing is collapsing little by little. It's absolutely dangerous, and so, of course, what? Yeah.
The idea for 60 seconds was much less complicated. I stole it. There's a movie from 2015, A Royal Night Out. It's a fictitious account of Princesses Margaret and future Queen Elizabeth, who they ditch their security team and they go out to celebrate the eve of Victory in Europe Day with London commoners. And I saw this movie, and it's a very cute movie, and afterward I started thinking about this war was ending for people on all sides. And I thought, how would that affect different people on different sides of the conflict and in different locations and under different circumstances? So as amateurs imitate, artists steal. This is a quote that has been attributed to at least those three guys, and God knows how many others. So as an artist, I stole the idea. So let's go to we're getting a little late here. Let's go to our final set of readings for this first hour here. And then we can do a little bit of Q&A. Michael, go ahead and talk about Robert.
Sure. This one. I think I got this up on my head now. Robert is the third form of idealist. Robert is the third form of idealist. Okay. And I want to read a little bit from the beginning, which is the what I call the Greek chorus at this point. It's in italics, and it's a little paragraph, sometimes just a word or two at the beginning of a chapter. But this one starts with, Robert's people had become Northwesterners by passion. They were recent arrivals who found they learned easily the beauty of many kinds of rain, the palette of blues and gray sky tinged with violet, celebrated by song dripping off eaves. None so passionate as recent converts. They wrote to their Midwest friends that they could come and visit, but they shouldn't come and live here. We all want the woods and streams and snowy mountains to ourselves. His father-in-law's firm sat there downtown waiting until Robert's flirtations with philosophy and classics at the university had exhausted themselves, the siren call of the sweet logic of law. Robert sang to the car radio, sang back to the birds, sang to his wife. Music connected all things, family, nature, law, the codas and andantes, the pianissimos, the fortissimos. Music organized and regulated, cleaned off the workbench and sharpened the tools to get ready for the next day. The law had been kind of an even keel for him. The point was usually to apply human reason to human unreasonableness and arrive at a solution based on history and custom. Seems like a good idea, he thought while pondering law school. So it turned out a little more ragged than that, a raggedy enterprise altogether. And still there was a kind of idealized, if somewhat hazy center that always claimed higher purpose and better nature. And that it was, turned out, an anodyne, a solution to the business of litigation, an inoffensive fallback position. Robert signed up. The other business, the unsettled Julie, the unsettling Julie, over years after high school and then after university, when hope faded to an impossible set of scenarios in which she came to him wounded and seeking shelter from her misfortunes in the big world. That Hail Mary, that act of God, grew more distant each year until in his early 30s that light went out. His wife, only vaguely aware of Julie's position in her husband's cosmos. Wasn't that your childhood friend Julie, who was in the paper about her world travels? She moved into first place for Robert, his wife did, having never fully realized her second-class citizenship, a seamless upgrade. And now, Robert thought, Julie is coming home, not to roost in all probability, but to recharge, recoup, re-something. Anyway, she would be incandescent in the landscape, relate a few indiscretions and a few torts, both civil and international. Then she'd be gone, like a spy, like an international mover and shaker that John had always suspected, agent provocateur, wielder of international banking instruments, consorter with Russian oligarchs and Montenegrin assassins. Julie, the incarnation of the Tsarina Catherine and the Great and the Tang Dynasty, and Wu Tian. Robert gathered his thoughts, consulted his watch.
The final three characters are Zimmer, a German Wehrmacht soldier, Riley Blaine, who was a mentally challenged young man who washed out of basic training, and Anthony Piatkowski, who is the husband to the Gosia Piatkowski character who was in the process, who was in labor in the previous reading. Zimmer. The distant sound of a woman singing made Zimmer stumble, and he once again cursed the dense obstacle course of gnarly exposed roots, fallen trees, and thorny brambles. Even though the city of Nuremberg was nearby, its adjoining forest, the Lorenzer, was thick enough to be daunting in the timid light of a slivered moon. He stopped to listen. The words of the song were in English, the singer's accent American. Looking up, he contemplated the night sky, seemingly enormous after hours in the dense forestation. Zimmer knew all the constellations. They taught the boys how to navigate by the stars in the Hitlerjugend. He'd been among the best of them and now searched for Ursa Major, recalling his instructor, Herr Grohe. Most of the boys, save Engel, had very much liked Herr Grohe. Engel was a rabid little National Socialist, constantly vigilant for traitors to the cause. Herr Grohe, gangly and bespectacled, was a reluctant Nazi, less embarrassed by the knobby knees that perturbed the hem of his khaki shorts than his armband with its prominent swastika. The camp counselor regretted joining the party, a confidence he'd inadvisably shared with the boys in his section over a late-night campfire on one of their survival maneuvers. He'd made them promise to keep his secret, but the zealous Engel had promptly betrayed him, and Herr Grohe disappeared, his quarters expeditiously occupied by a new man with less knowledge of astronomy and greater pride in his armband. That's one thing about the party, Zimmer mused. They were efficient. Riley. Riley Blaine fought his way through the crowd, several rows of the standing room only audience still separating him from the stage. He could see Jenny and hear her voice coming from the huge loudspeakers on the dais. On one side of the stage, a glass booth had been constructed. 2 men were inside, one half standing. He wore headphones and held a piece of paper against the glass that bifurcated the transparent enclosure. "Watch it, buddy." Riley looked to the voice. An unapologetically drunk sailor in dress blues stared at him. "Don't be crowding me," the swabby added, afterward struggling unsuccessfully to sustain a frown that morphed into a wide grin. He slapped Riley on the back. "That's okay, pal. The war in Europe is over. Everything's okay now." Through the perilous fight, Jenny sang, from the stage, the outdoor speakers lending an artificial warble to her voice that belied its natural clarity. On Riley's single night in the Doyle home, she'd played the piano and sung "Someone to Watch Over Me." "O'er the ramparts we watched," she sang on, as Riley shouldered his way closer, pushing through a jungle of sharp elbows and peeved expressions. He kept one hand on the pistol in the pocket of his coat. The time was nearing, and he was still too far away. Antony. Warsaw had always been home to Antony. Born and raised in the Polish capital city, he and Gosia had married, believing they'd raise a family there. Now they were homeless, hoping to become Americans. Gosia was already in the United States, Antony to join her once the interrogations and trials in Nuremberg were over. "Should we take another crack at him?" the major asked. Antony looked up from his seat on a bench in the stockades guard room. The major stood in the open doorway. Antony shrugged. "I don't see any point, Major. Stengler won't give us anything, especially with a Jew in the room." The major nodded. An affable man when Nazis weren't in his sights, he continued. "Have you heard from Gosia? She's got to be close to delivery. That must feel good, to be a father. And your baby will be an American. That must feel good, too." It was true, Antony conceded. Their child would be an American, grow up in the land of milk and honey, have children and grandchildren who would know all the words to the song now being broadcast across the world. It was what he and Gosia had both wanted, and yet, as the girl on the guardroom radio sang the national anthem of his soon-to-be adoptive country, he no longer found the words comforting. Now you can applaud. We are going to talk a little bit about process and the journey to publishing as time allows in the second hour. But let's open it up to questions. If there are any questions now, this is a good time to ask. Right here. We can probably hear you.
Ava Dittler. Just wondering how you were able to get into the minds of characters in the Second World War that were in the SS.
Well, that's always really a trick. I mean, how do you get into the mind, somebody else's mind? You know, I don't know that one can say that you can ever do it accurately. I researched this character. Originally, I went to college. I majored in English and history, and with a focus on creative writing. And my area of expertise in my senior thesis was really about the rise of National Socialism in Germany. So I had a lot of opinions about this, and I had read, I don't read German, but I'd read translations of editorials and things in German newspapers back in the 20s when this was going on. I felt like I had a grasp of what the philosophy of such a person was. And because I've lived a long time, you know, you come across people who know the difference between right and wrong and don't care, you know. And I think that probably, when I was writing the Stengel character, even though I really didn't know him, I knew he was real, I just made a presumption that he was probably a sociopathic narcissist, and that's how I wrote it. Right here.
Good morning, this is Eric, and I had the pleasure of hearing you both talk about your new books when you gave the talk at the library in Silverton. But I think I remember from asking you at that meeting, I was an English major as an undergrad at the University of Michigan and had a number of creative writing courses, and several of the professors always said, well, if you're really interested in writing a book, you should maintain a diary beginning of all, you know, your experiences over the years, and to give you different ideas. And I think you both said that you didn't necessarily agree with that. You had not done that, for example, in getting the ideas for your latest book. Is that correct? That you haven't maintained a diary?
Well, I've not kept so much a diary, which is a series of personal things, as I've connected. We have a picture later for the second half of all the forms of notebooks I have. Oh. Like got 47 notebooks, little ones that fit in your pocket, big ones that you leave around, scraps of paper that get shoved into something else. And it's and Stephen and I actually, we talked about this, and we'll get into more in the second half.
Okay.
But not so much a diary. And a personal diary is, I think, and I've read in literature, of course, Proust, and Proust made a novel out of the personal diaries, and various other. John Dos Passos, one of the people who was probably underrated in American. Has diaries and wrote them as diaries. And one of my early novels had a lot of diaries in it. And diaries have a certain potency, don't they? They have that place you go in yourself to find out about yourself, including the fictions, the stories, the compensatory narratives that we have in order to live with ourselves. We have stories and I once taught a course, and I'll just do this briefly, in autobiography. And it turns out autobiography, if you look at it very carefully, is exactly the same as novels. They are structured like a novel. They have agendas. You're either a victim or you're a hero. It's got this, it comes out exactly. It took us 14 weeks in a semester to figure that out, but it turned out at the theoretical level. So the personal diary is a potent thing, and various people have kept them, from Dr. Johnson in the 18th century. And
If I led you to believe that I didn't really keep track of things like that, then I answered your question in Silverton badly, because I do have an ideas file. And many years ago, when I was in my Jack Kerouac phase, and I was very young, and I was on a hitchhiking trip, and I was actually on a flatbed going through Laramie, Wyoming, on a rail flatbed that I'd hitched onto. And it's the middle of the night, and I'm looking in the night sky, and I wrote this thing, and I still have it. And it's one of the most pretentious things that I've ever written in my life. It was terrible. And so I quit writing diary type things, because I really just couldn't stand myself. But I do have an ideas file, and as I pointed out, I steal stuff all the time. And And so be careful what you say to me, because you may end up in a book. I do have an ideas file, and I go to the ideas file more often when I'm writing a book and I am searching for something that I need to inject into a character that I've already created. At this point, most of the time, I don't go to it for an idea to start a new project anymore. But yeah, I have a very extensive ideas file. It's just not a diary, because, I can't stand myself.
Oh, thank you.
Just one thing I would like to add. There's a story of James Thurber, the great American humorist. And he was at a party, and he was standing on a couple of steps between the two rooms. It was full of people. He was standing there with a glass of white wine in his hand, and his wife came up and jabbed him in the ribs and said, "Thurber, stop writing."
Okay, hi, my name is Lisa, and I was wondering, first of all, how much personal experience is in your writing, even though you based on different source, and then, especially you based it on a movie, and I was wondering, okay, that's great, then where do you go from there?
I don't know the personal experience, but this book's very different from my other books. I usually write books that are about 10% copying some writer I admire and 90% smart aleck. That's sort of my brand, is heart humor and a dash of crime. This book is a much more serious book. I don't know that I put experiences into this necessarily. I put things I'd learned, research, and I put philosophy into it. I think that there's a lot of philosophy, particularly as it relates to the world that we live in right now, and the parallel between the rise of fascism and authoritarianism in the 30s and the rise that we're experiencing now in this country. My other books, yeah, there'll be a lot of things that are based on personal experience. And later on, I'm going to read a short section from a book that'll come out a year from this summer from WICL House. It's called The Bank House. And it's not my personal experience, but I'll share with you where I got the idea for that particular scene when we come to that point.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break now, so we'll be back in 10.
Thank you. Okay, fiction, writing fiction, is it inspiration or perspiration? Well, it's a little of both, but I think it's a lot of perspiration. When you start out writing and you take creative writing classes, they tell you to just write what you know. And that's true. You want to write what you know. And I have this story about Roger Welsh, the folklorist from the University of Nebraska. I took a class from him when I was very young in creative writing. And he gave us this write what you know thing. And there was a girl in the class, and she said, I don't really know anything interesting. And he told us to all go home, write something that we'd experienced or that someone had told us about that they'd experienced, and come back. And she came back, and her story was about her grandmother, who was a Sand Hills farm wife in Nebraska. And every week on laundry day, she washed the clothes, she took them out, she hung them on the lawn to dry. They dried, she took them down, put them in a basket, took it in, folded them up, and included among these things was a pair of sleeping long johns that her husband had. And she would put the long johns back in his dresser, and the next week on laundry day, she'd take them out of the dresser, and she'd wash them again, hang them on the line, let them dry, bring them back, fold them up, put them in the dresser. Because she didn't want her neighbors to know that her husband slept in the nude. And Dr. Welsh said, you just can't make up stuff that good. So you probably got some experiences about that, like that too. About write what you know versus know.
Yeah. I was going to tell that story about how I became a writer in seventh grade.
Do.
Someone asked us in a different venue, how did you know how did you figure out you were going to be a writer, that you were a writer? And mine was in 7th grade. Miss Schmidler, I can remember her. Miss Schmidler in 7th grade assigned us all to write a poem. And we went home that night and we wrote a poem. And I came in and read it. And I lived right on Lake Michigan, and I'd heard about ore boats going down. And I wrote this poem, and it was about the ore boat going down, big loss of life. And then the sun comes out and there's a rainbow, and it ends up, and beautiful to hide the pain. And I turned the poem in, she reads it, and she comes up to me the next day in class and flops the poem down in front of me and said, "You didn't write this. I'm going to find out where this came from. I'm going to fail you in this." And she was in my face. I know, as a teacher, I know what you really do is you say, "Write me another one, write me 5 more. Okay, but not Miss Schmidler. Miss Schmidler was in my face about it. And as she went away, she was going to find that poem, and I thought, damn, I'm a writer. I came from just big enough of a family, so in the middle there, that, you know, that's crap going on the side was going to destroy any part of me. But then I knew I was a writer. Okay.
The other part about write what you know, Alistair MacLean wrote The Guns of Navarone and Ice Station Zebra and Where Eagles Dare, which were these popular adventure books that were made into popular movies. And they were about mountain climbers and spies and, commandos and nuclear submarine commanders. And he was not writing what he knew, what he had experienced, because he was a Scottish librarian. He had never been any of those things, but he researched it and he knew what he was writing about. So I think you can write what you know, but you can also know what you write. And so research, whether you know what you're writing about or not, becomes very, very important. Eventually, however, you have to stop procrastinating and just begin. And Michael has written the Moby Dick Blues, so this is a nice segue for him to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I wrote a book called The Moby Dick Blues. I was teaching at Willamette. At Willamette, we had this wonderful grant. We wrote for a grant from National Endowment for the Humanities, I think it was, or the arts. And we got a certain amount of money, and we got money to bring people in to teach a single text, and then to bring people in, famous scholars or whatever it is, to work with the students on the text and sort of do that Willamette rich soup experience. And I taught a lot of them. In fact, I volunteered to the dean's office. Anytime you're looking for somebody to do one of these, I'll do one. I did one on Thoreau and on Melville and Emerson, but I did one on the Moby Dick Blues. And it turns out one of the interesting things about Moby Dick is that it was published in order to get copyright in England at the same time as it was published in the U.S. U.S. so it's all this historical background. U.S. had copyright since the 1820s, but no, it was what does Hamlet say? More honored in the breach than the observance. That is, nobody enforced it here. And so Melville wanted to publish his book in England, and he published it at the same time in England. And in England, they would set the type on the book, and then they were notorious for having a drink for lunch and then just making shit up, basically, for the second half. They didn't know an American word. They just stuck something in there. And so they set it as a triptych, as 3 books that came together in England, and it was published in the U.S. by Harper Brothers. Harper Brothers had a big fire, probably lost the manuscript. But not sure even. And so between the British publication and the American publication, there are 5,000, for scholars, 5,000 substantive errors. Coiled fish, soiled fish. Ooh, that's what we love in the English world. The coiled fish versus the soiled fish, that Protestant love of soiling things. Oops, sorry. That in the literature, in the Puritan literature, things are soiled. So there's that potent thing that's going on. Plus, he's taking long walks with Hawthorne, and all of that business is going on. So 5,000 substantive errors. I begin after teaching this, I think, what if somebody found that manuscript in a wall in a town, let's see, New Bedford, let's make it Boston. And boom, 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 the pieces started to go together, but it was all one little ember glowing, the loss of that manuscript. What would that manuscript, who would be after that manuscript? Bad guys, good guys? Northwestern University Libraries, which has the big Melville collection. Who would be after that thing? I even had an NBA player in there. As certain NBA players have shown, they invest in art, which just turns out to be not a bad investment. And so this piece of art, this manuscript for Moby Dick, became the Moby Dick Blues. And actually, the first title of it was the Moby Dick Murders. And my publisher at the same time, because people die in here from various things, and my publisher said, you don't want to put murders in that title unless it's a murder mystery, unless it has this structure. Because the murder mystery people are going to get a hold of this and be pissed off that it's not structured like it should be, and it wasn't. So it became the Moby Dick Blues. And that's the saga.
So this was being created. This is Michael's workspace on the left and mine on the right. Some writers have to be in a certain space, and I'm not one of them, but a lot of writers have to be in a certain space. They can't function unless they're in that space. Some people can write in a coffee shop, which I've never understood. I think that, well, Michael, you talk about your space a little bit here.
I got 2 cats and a raccoon that come and visit me there. There's a little fish pond there, and you can see part of the bridge. And there's a little bridge, and the raccoon comes and sits there and looks and see, are they ripe yet, my fish? Nah, they're not worth chasing, and waters off. And the 2 cats, I don't know where the cats come from, but they are big suckers, like 20-pound cats that come from.
I find I can write anywhere. And I'm always reminded of Jack London, who wrote 1,000 words a day repeatedly. And but he would go to, sometimes he'd be at a party if he hadn't gotten his 1,000 words in, and he'd be sitting off in a corner someplace, writing his 1,000 words, and because he could write anywhere. And I've found that I don't have to be in this space, but I am actually most productive in this space.
Well, Graham Greene was another one who did that. Graham Greene wrote 1,100 words a day. Everybody has their thing. He was on vacation with his friends in the Aegean, and he would go up in front of the mast, write his 1,100 words, go back down, start drinking in the aft of the sailboat.
And the process of constructing a book is different for everybody. There are plotters and there are swoopers. I'm a swooper. I will throw. I'm sort of like Jackson Pollock. I'm going to throw all this stuff at the canvas and then hope that maybe I can make sense of it later on. And so I'll try and get through a basic idea fairly quickly, knowing I'm going to have to do a lot of revision. Judith McConnell Steele is a friend of mine who's written a beautiful book, The Angel of Esperanza. And she's a plotter. She writes a perfect sentence, and she takes a day or 2 or 3 or a month. And then she writes another perfect sentence, and she just keeps writing one perfect sentence after another. And when she's done, there's virtually no revision at all. The book's done. And I would just never be able to do that. I start a log when I write a book, and I keep track of the words. And I shoot for 250 words a day. And I begin each day by revising what I wrote the day before. And sometimes I delete almost everything I wrote the day before. Usually I add things to it, and as time goes on, this word count naturally builds. So by the time I get done with the manuscript, and my manuscripts are typically around 90,000 words, by the time I get done, I've usually had about 750 usable words per day, but I've gone over these things so many times that to ask how many drafts there are of something makes no sense, because I may have gone over each part of the book dozens of times, because you're just constantly, you're beginning by looking at what you did the day before, and sometimes you're going back because you realize I took off in a certain direction, or I have this character doing something, and now I have to go back to, I'm in chapter 7, I've got to go back to chapter 1, and I've got to fix this now. And so over the course of time, for me, it takes me about 6 to 9 months to construct an initial draft that I think I can begin to, that has a beginning and a middle and an end. And then I will begin the process of revision and self-editing and workshopping with my writing group, whom I've been with for over 30 years. And eventually I get to a point where I have a draft that I think is readable, and I give it to my most important content editor, who is my wife. And she will read it, and she will tell me the truth about it. And I'll tell you one story, and then I'll shut up, because I'm going on and on here. But in the Penny Mansions, Pam read the book, and she said, I think this might be the best thing you've ever written. Except there's one problem with this one scene and with this one character, and the character was named Bountiful Dollarhide, a young woman, and I don't need to describe the scene, but I said, what's wrong with the scene? And Pam said, there's no woman in her right mind that would do that. And so I realized I'm going to have to rewrite this character all the way through because of that, and so I pouted for a couple of days. And then I realized she was right, and when I went back and started doing it, the revision was really quite easy, because all of the stupid things that I'd had this woman do were very apparent to me once it was pointed out to me that no woman in her right mind would do that. So, what's your process of constructing?
That's a logic. I always think Hemingway. I remember Hemingway used to start his writing by having a bunch of pencils, and he was living in Paris, and he had a knife, and he would sharpen the pencils with his knife, knowing that when he started first of the 20 pencils, the first one, he was already writing. Sort of, because the second and the third, he would write these and he'd get his head into it. And everybody has something. I have a little, my daughter gave me a little cup warmer. You know, the little switch you put your cup on, it keeps your beverage warm. So I turn that on, I look in the little red light, and out comes all my writing. No, I don't know. But I need to do that. I need to turn that on, and I need to check the fish pond, and then I need to poke around in my books, and then a couple of other things, and then I'm ready to go.
Here are
My
your
sharpening
books back
pencils.
here. Here's your books back here.
Yeah, well, that's a collection of my notebooks, a partial collection of notebooks from all over the place. Some little tiny ones go in pockets. A couple of those were from banks, and the one with the fish on it, and there's a couple of others in there, and sometimes I go back in there and I thought, who the hell is this guy? What is this? But they were important, and I think maybe the physical action of doing it also writes it in my brain. You know how sometimes it's easier to remember things if you just write it, and you can throw that thing away. Now, having written it, it writes it in your brain a little bit, and then all the things begin to talk to each other. This business here on a piece of paper, I still like. I'm an old guy, and I still like the drag of the pen on the paper. Though I write on a machine, I know I don't have secretaries and things to type this up for me. So I write most of it there, but I also get to passages like Stephen was talking about where you know something's wrong. And instead of trying to fix it, I just go blah, and I hit the space bar a bunch of times, and then I go on. And what I like to do ultimately when I get to a draft where I can work on it is to take is to have it printed out, $30. Don't wreck your printer at home, take it to the print shop, get it all printed out. And now I get my pen out and I write and put a little caret over here, turn it over, write on the back, and I get another 10,000 words sometimes in there, adding stuff, throwing out stuff, so that it puts that physical act in it. It puts that physical motion in it. I had a friend who just died at 104. He was a very interesting guy, a professor at the University of Oregon, and he used to do it in pencil. He said he liked the drag of the pencil on the paper. So he was, so this business here, Stephen and I have a version of it. Stephen's style would come up. But my style is this mess over here. It looks like a mess, but it's connections and it's little pieces of this and that. And this is something I'm working on now with 35 characters in it. I'm not sure what's going to happen here, but I will have
It's a funny book.
I'll have a lot of arrows in it and business going on. And then Stephen has another version of this, but we talked, and it's kind of the same thing.
I taught myself how to compose on a typewriter when I was very young because I thought it was cool. And so the transfer to the computers and the keyboard was very easy. And so I construct things. I compose on the keyboard and on the computer. And then this is a book that I'm working on now called The Ghosts Analyst that I hope to have finished sometime this year. And everything I write with markup, in Word with markup, and so the changes are in red, and then I ask myself questions over on the side in the comments. Sometimes we'll just say, why is this character doing this? Or why did this happen? Or do you need this? Or should this be moved down? Or a lot of times it's just in the beginning I'm asking myself, why did this character do this? Why is this person here? And for example, in 60 Seconds, originally there were 17 characters in 60 Seconds, and I included the Pacific Theater of operations during the Second World War. And again, my wife helps me with this. In Delphic Oracle USA, I think I had like 200 characters in there. And when she read that one, she just said, well, get rid of about 175 of them, which I did. And so I realized, having learned my lesson, that I needed to cone it down. But when you're starting out a draft, you just don't really know necessarily where it's going to go. And but this is my way of doing it. I will go through, and by the time I'm done, I will have had to have addressed every one of these notes on the side. And that's one of the ways that I police myself and make sure that I'm not forgetting to do something. Eventually, as I said, I've been with the same writing group for over 30 years, and 2 of them are pretty good editors. They're all writers. And I workshop these books as I go along, and then eventually my wife will be my initial content editor. And all this is happening before I want to show this to a publisher. But eventually, we're going to, well, not eventually, we will all need editors. Every writer needs an editor. How do you get your editing done before you send it to our guys? North Carolina.
Before I send it out, I like to read it out loud like I've never seen it before. I said, this takes a while, but it also gives me a sense of the rhythms of things and rhythmic sentences, and both of us write purposely rhythmic sentences, so we listen to the sound. It's, if you've ever read a book that's subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object, I scream, the colon, the semicolon, the beautiful heritage of the English language with the Latinate progressive sentence that can, and all the kinds of ways that Anglo-Saxon and Latin come together, and all the gifts. Borges, the Spanish writer from South America, says he writes in English a lot because it has all these languages come together. English, there's never been a language like English, more than 1 million words, etc., etc. Borges were a lover of writing in English. And so my deal is to read it out loud and just taste it like you're tasting it for the first time. I wrote an article on Tom Robbins one time, a review and an interview, and we were snowed in. He in Washington, me here, so I was going to see him, but we got snowed in, spent hours and hours on the telephone, and he said he writes a sentence, like your friend, puts another sentence down, finishes the day with that sentence. He comes to the last sentence in the book, and it's done. So all this business we're talking about, all this editing, all this reading out loud, all this retasting, all this writing on the back in pencil was apparently done from him. I
hate him.
I know. He's gone now, but I mean, he did all that in there. He did all of that. He found a way to put it inside there. And he was a nonfiction writer before he started writing even Cowgirls Get the Blues and Skinny Legs and all that wonderful stuff that he wrote.
And during the process of all of this, preparing to actually show this to somebody who's going to publish it, this is where we've talked a lot. We have coffee together all the time, and we talk about the jazz of writing, where the prose is like music. It's like constructing a symphony where the words are notes, and the punctuation and the sentence breaks creates rhythm and pace, and then you can use phrasing and tone to provide pitch, and all together then you construct a melody. And to me, reading it aloud, as you say, it sounds different than when you're reading it on the page. And so I do the same thing. I will read it aloud. And recently, I actually created an audiobook for one of my daughters for a book that's upcoming because she didn't have time to read and she wanted to use an audiobook thing. So I got on GarageBand and I made an audiobook. And what was interesting is when I listened to it back with the text in front of me up on the computer. And as I was listening to it coming back, I was picking up stuff that I had never picked up by reading it out loud to myself or by seeing it on the page. There were just things that I just missed. And sometimes it was something silly like a word was gone or it was punctuation was wrong. But a lot of times it was just, there was just something, it didn't make any sense. The way the thing was constructed, the music didn't make any sense. You know, you hit a wrong note. Does that happen to you?
Yeah, well, F. Scott Fitzgerald famously edited his work drunk. And his editor said he was a better editor drunk than a lot of people were sober. No, I don't do mine drunk. But I listened for that song. We talk about the jazz when we were talking about the jazz of this. I mean, jazz is again, I'll go back to that thing. Jazz without ideas is just noise. It's associative, and that's the beauty of jazz, is that it's associative. Any of you play an instrument or something like that, where you sit down and you don't know where it's going to go. You don't quite know where it's going to go until those two notes set off something else, and you can feel the seventh, and you can feel now you can just resolve it the regular way, or you can do, and I've just been listening to Eric Satie. Anybody know this stuff? This is sort of attack on the classic structure, on the classical structure, on all the expectations, on all the things you're supposed to put in a piece of piano music that he wouldn't put in, and pissed a lot of people off, except for Debussy, who liked him. But anyway, this sense that what you just did will lead to where you're going. And there's that energy thing. If you got the energy to make the thing that leads to that geometric progression where the 2 become 4, the 4, 8, the 8, 16, and lead you off into this story. Or as Stephen said, how do you then accommodate some place that you went that messes with what you've already done? And that's that editing process.
And eventually, however, you are ready to show it to somebody and see if you can enter into the publishing pathway. So it's done now. And now what? Well, it's a world of rejection. And like all artists, you sort of live in this world of rejection, and you have to get used to that. And so there are different pathways that one can take, but classically what people would want to do is you get a literary agent, the literary agent sells your book to a major publisher, the major publisher then makes a bestseller out of it, and they make a movie out of it, and you become rich and famous, and you get to, be interviewed on television where you make an ass of yourself because you're not really good at being on television. But there is the whole thing about the literary agent is sort of the initial hurdle. And here we go. And we both had agents. I don't have an agent at present. My agent retired, and I had book contracts, and I just didn't pursue getting another agent. But I went to a writers' conference some years ago, and all of the agents there were so proud of themselves. And they were so incredibly busy. We can't read everything. And we want a query letter from you in as few words as possible. We want you to summarize your book in as few words as possible because we're very, very busy people. And so I decided after that, I was trying to get an agent for Treasure of the Blue Whale, which I eventually did. But I just decided, I've had it with these people and I'm too old to deal with this stuff. So I want to be rejected in as few words as possible. So I'm going to start writing query letters to see how fast can I get rejected. My goal, my Moby Dick, was 5 words or less. I wanted to be rejected after "to whom it may concern." Right then, I wanted to just go, boom, denied, and set it off. And interestingly, I went to the same writers' conference after that, a year or so after that, and they have these cattle call sessions where they have a room full of agents, and you go in and you have 3 minutes to pitch your book to them, and they decide whether or not they want to see any pages or see the whole book or whatever. And I had researched ahead of time the agents who were most likely to appreciate Treasure of the Blue Whale. And I was standing in a line, and there was this woman who was over in a corner, and nobody was at her table at all. And I looked at her and I said, "You look so nice, why is nobody at your table?" And she said, "I am very nice, why don't you pitch to me?" And I said, "Well, you only do nonfiction." And she said, "Well, pitch to me anyway." And I did, and she said, "Okay, well, send it to me." And I said, "Well, how many pages do you want?" She said, "Send me the whole book." And so I sent her the book, and 6 weeks later I got an email, and she wanted to be my agent. And that's how, and before that I'd had an agent very briefly, some years before that, and I'd written a book, the only medical book I'd ever written, which is still on a shelf. And he wrote it, and he said, "I can't sell this, you know, you're aiming at women and it's too sad." And Oprah was on at the time, and I said, "Well, you've never seen Oprah then, obviously." And, but that book's still on a shelf. I don't think it was too sad. Maybe I'll go back to it. But those were my 2 agents. Right now, I'm agent-free, and I'm kind of happy to be there.
I'm agent-free too. My first agent died. She was Ann Elmo.
Not because of you.
Not because of me.
Yeah.
Apparently I was not involved with this, but she was Ann Elmo, who was sort of famous. The Ann Elmo agency still exists. And today they don't do fiction anymore. Anyway, she died, and then I sort of wandered off, and I was living in Spain. And anyway, the second agent dealt with I think my first novel, with Hawthorne Books in Portland, and that was and then right after that she decided that she didn't want to be an agent anymore. She wanted to work for some other kind of group in which the agenting process would be working. So then she was, I don't know, filtering or doing something else. Anyway, so I'm agentless also. But we fell upon had the luck to come across our publisher that we both like a lot.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. We want to do some readings from our upcoming books, but in the process of getting published in the last 25 years, the digital revolution has led to this mushrooming, promiscuous proliferation of yes. About 2.5 million books were published in this country in 2024, and of those, about 20% were traditionally published in the sense that the author wasn't paid. The authors submitted, the publisher picked it up, whether it was a big publisher or a small publisher. They paid for everything, they produced it, they distributed, they marketed, etc. The other 2 million books were books that were essentially self-published, and that doesn't mean they're bad. There's a lot of work out there that's really good. Years ago, when I wrote sketch comedy in LA, I met a young woman who had trained in voice at Carnegie Mellon. She had a beautiful voice, and she used to just knock people's socks off at open mics and things like that around LA. And after 2 years, the only job she'd gotten was to be part of a quartet in a Jack in the Box commercial, where their line was for only 49 cents. So there's a lot of really talented people in the world who don't necessarily find their way to a traditional publisher or a recording contract or whatever, and I just think I'm very much aware of that there are a lot of good artists in the world. Right now, the legacy publishers, there's 5, and it's Hachette, Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, and HarperCollins. And they have swallowed a bunch of smaller imprints, so there's a lot of imprints within, under their umbrellas. But those are the big 5, and that's where a lot of the bestsellers come from. That's where the publishing industry, the trade journals like Publishers Weekly, and Kirkus and all these people, they tend to just go right to these books that are coming out of these houses. The next set of publishers, the small independent presses, include a press like ours, Regal House, which was established in 2015. They put out about 25 to 30 books a year. They put out well over 300. They were the 2021 Forward magazine, one of our trade journals, small publisher of the year. And they do eclectic titles. And what's interesting is that if you get into these small independent presses, you'll find a lot of really, really interesting work. Because very often they're either well capitalized enough to publish something that nobody else is going to publish, or they just simply don't care. They're going to do this stuff until they go broke. And so you'll find a lot of interesting work there as opposed to self-help books and celebrity tell-alls and, you know, a lot of crap that sometimes comes out of the legacy publishers, although a lot of wonderful work comes out of the legacy publishers as well. Hybrid publishers, we'll just address this briefly. Hybrid publishers are people who are basically a self-publishing company, but they claim to provide some editing support. You pay for it, and it's expensive. And truthfully, if you just go straight, what they used to call vanity press, which is straight self-publishing, where you do your own editing or you hire your own editor, you're essentially better off. It's less expensive, and the books that they come up with are the same. Now, the truth is that anybody can produce a book that looks good now. You know, you can hire a designer, you can hire, you know, marketing, you can hire an editor, you can put out a quality product. You don't need a legacy publisher, you don't need a small independent press. You can do it. And in fact, somebody like T.R. Pearson, who had a publishing contract, wrote A Short History of a Small Place, abandoned his contract. He dropped it for self-publishing because he was going to make more money doing it himself. So he just simply hired his own editor and hired his own designers, and he publishes his own work, and he takes home most of the profit. So from a business standpoint, if you've got a following, that's a road to pursue.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Tom Corcoran, who writes great stuff about kind of murder mysteries about the Florida Keys, did the same thing. He was with St. Martin Press for a long time, and then they just became so difficult because they were interested in something else at some time or another. You hear the horror story. But he just set up his own publishing company and published his own books and sells a lot of them. He's been gone now for a couple of years, but his books really are still selling very well. If you're interested in murder mysteries about the Florida Keys. He also did covers for rock stars and photographed various kinds of things for Jimmy Buffett, etc. And wrote one of the Jimmy Buffett songs with them, the shark one. You know, the one about the sharks? That's a Tom Corcoran song. But so this business of some kind of monolithic sense of publishing quickly falls apart into all different kinds of pieces. And it's sort of the jazz of publishing too.
Yeah.
There are riffs, there are variations and combinations.
So we want to get to our final readings, which are from our upcoming books. This is our wonderful editor-in-chief and publisher, Janie Royal from Regal House Publishing out of North Carolina. And I just wanted to put her picture up there because we're so grateful to her, and we just love working with her and with this company, and it's what brought us together. So it's been great. Now, Michael, talk a little bit about A Confluence of Strangers, which is his new book, which will be released officially in April.
April 2nd, yeah. Yeah, April 2nd, this is coming out. This is one of the strangest covers I've ever seen.
I love that cover.
Things are crossword and people are wandering around on it. What I wrote in the John and Julie and Robert was friends who'd gone different directions and come back together. These are people who are completely from elsewhere and come into a small town that looks a lot like Salem, has a bakery, which my wife had, you remember, there is a university like this, so it's a university professor, a guy and a woman who worked for the government and now comes back to, so three people who come together and they're apart and come together and make one thing. And let me just read a little bit. There's a university professor who teaches English who smells a lot like me in here. Just a lot of this does. So his name is Leon. There are changes of keys in here if you want to listen for these in a musical sense. It was the same technique, I told him, page 1, that we used for sussing out literary mysteries, the disappearance of the manuscript from Moby Dick. The manuscript, if we had it, will help us solve hundreds of textual problems with that sucker. And why not discover who the hell Homer was? A man, a woman, a gang of inventive whos. So when he turned up dead, I couldn't stop thinking how painfully small these literary mysteries were compared with who killed that earnest little guy and why. I liked my Oregon ivory tower, always did, but somehow the scabby world came after me time after time. Alex was just a guy from town who thought the university was, by some metaphorical extension, the intellectual property of everyone who was interested in something that went on in the hallowed halls. So he dropped by my office, during office hours usually, and asked questions like, what are the 4 or 5 funniest books ever written in English? When I told him my opinion on the subject, he thanked me, excused himself as if he were off to the library, take them all out. He told me his name was Alex Trevelyan, something from the Welch group, he said, a retired federal employee, though he didn't say what he did for the feds. That turned out to be the devil in the details. So, this is a murder mystery. We got a dead guy on page 1.
I'm going to read from the Bank House. I just went into contract with the Bank House last fall. It's about 18 to 24 months from the time you go into contract until a book is released. And so the Bank House is actually just going to be entering into the early production phase probably next month. And usually about 8 to 9 months before the book is released, we'll actually have a book like this, a review copy, and the pre-sale stuff will all begin. Now this book takes place in 1952. The protagonist is a young kid named Reeves Whitlock, who is at the end of this scene takes place fairly deep into the book. It's at a school dance at the end of the year, and he is been in love with this girl, Nina Mondelez, who is attending this Midwestern high school in Nebraska from Nicaragua. And he's going to cement his relationship with her at this dance. He's determined. And so he shows up. He's a little late getting there. And he shows up and he's got new clothes and he's got bro-creamed hair. And he's got a mouthful of about 7 sticks of dentine gum to make sure his breath is fresh. And he is ready to win this girl over for once. They go out on the dance floor. She's happy to see him, and she leads him onto the dance floor, and the scene begins. I began to lead her, and we danced. Actually danced. I was a 2-stepping dynamo, Nina seamlessly following my lead with her thigh pressed against mine to discern my next step. I turned my face into her hair, pulled in its scent, and then lifted my head like Mom had taught me, channeling Gene Kelly as I confidently 2 steps left, 1 backed the love of my life around the gymnasium floor. A space formed around us, the other couples nearly motionless as they wobbled in place. I felt their eyes, the boys smirking because I knew how to dance, the girls jealous for the same reason. I no longer cared what they thought and took a chance, changing the direction of my 2 steps left. Nina followed. I 1 backed and tried it again in a different direction. She stayed with me. And then I whirled us completely around like Gene Kelly and Leslie Caron, turning us into a single destined thing, cheek to cheek, eternally joined, exquisitely matched. It was perfect, unimaginably perfect, until I realized that my gum was no longer in my mouth. You're a very good dancer, Nina whispered in my ear. She released my hand and slipped both arms around my neck. I was unable to respond, not because her voice was exotic, her perfume mesmerizing, or her body pressed against mine and possibly arousing. No, I was speechless because I'd found my lost chewing gum. It was stuck in Nina's luxurious black hair, looking less like a pinkish wad of dentine than a chunk of my tongue. I put my cheek next to hers and tried to retrieve my gum like a baby bird stretching its neck to take a worm from its mother's beak. "What are you doing, silly?" Nina giggled, her voice as musical as Nat King Cole's. He was nearing the end of his song with a promise that people were wrong. Young love did last. Indeed, our love, Nina's and mine, would last if I could just retrieve the wayward asteroid of Dentine before the singer's silky smooth voice sent its last notes into the hot, sweltering air of the gymnasium. I spun Nina around one more time and went for it like a killer whale engulfing a giant squid, loudly humming the melody of Young Love to cover the gnashing sounds as I chewed off a mouthful of her hair, along with the entrapped gum. The song ended, and Mr. Rafferty announced the close of the evening. This is the last one, folks. I hope you've all had fun. After this number, please leave in an orderly fashion and have a great summer. We'll see you all next fall. He put the stylus on a record, and Patty Page's lovely contralto began to essay the Tennessee Waltz. I knew how to do this dance step too, and adopted a classical waltz pose with Nina, our bodies separated, our chins and elbows up. We waltzed, and the dreamlike evening stretched leisurely toward its conclusion as my stomach began to take issue with a gallon of cherry Coke, 4 bags of popcorn, Dentine gum, and Central American hair. A tide of nausea surged, and I stopped dancing. Nina leaned back and studied my face. "Are you all right?" she asked. I stepped away from her and bent, hands on my knees, my breathing erratic. It had been a magical evening, and the song chosen to cap the night, just over 3 minutes long, was magical too. However, my carriage turned back into a pumpkin at 2 minutes and 32 seconds when I loudly vomited onto the dimly lit gymnasium floor, adding a bilious melange of cherry Coke, semi-digested popcorn, and Nicaraguan hair to the event's pungent aroma of sweaty teenagers and romance. That is it. We are going to be over here at a table with some books available. We'll sign some books. We're not running past the hour, but I like this cartoon. I drew this in medical school. We had a microbiology professor who always ran over the hour, and he made us show up even though everything in the exam was in the book or the syllabus. But he would dock you if you didn't show up for his stupid lectures. And so we'd have to come to his lectures, and then he would run over the hour. And at the time, we were taking, 8 or 9 classes a day, every day, and you didn't want people running over the hour, you needed your time. So I drew this cartoon and I pinned it up on the bulletin board one day, and I anonymously, otherwise he would have docked me. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, ICL, for inviting us.
Questions? We got a couple minutes.
Hello, I'm Mark, and your slide, 2 slides up, actually inspired my question, the purgatory question. That one there, yeah.
That one.
So my question is, from your experience, if someone was to take that vanity press route, is there any chance for them to cross back over into the pearly gates?
It happens.
Okay.
It does happen. There are scouts for the legacy publishers that will go out, and they'll mostly, though, they're scouting the small presses more so than the self-published work. But one of the more famous, really bad books ever written became a huge bestseller that was self-published, and it was that 50 Shades of Grey. And that was a self-published book that need never see light.
Colleen Hoover started out this way. She now sells millions and millions and millions. Top of the New York Times list. She started out self-publishing.
Most of the time what happens is that somebody will self-publish a book and the next book gets picked up by somebody. But there are people, I belong to the Authors Guild, and almost every day somebody will have something in there about somebody who is self-published and they've gotten an offer. Sometimes the offers are legit and sometimes they aren't. Typically though, if you're going to get something like that, it's because you've pressed it yourself. You've you've taken the next book and you've pushed it with a legacy press or with one of the independent presses.
Ava again, hi. I'm just wondering, it's so difficult to get published nowadays, and then the other thing about getting published is not only do you need to be a great writer, you also need to be a social person, because you have to be able to do things like you're doing right now. You've got to have a social media thing. I mean, is there any way around that? Can you just be like a shy person and write a good book and not have to do all that stuff?
Probably. You'd have to be a better writer than I am, probably, to do that. I'm sure, you know, the truth is, yes, most writers, whether you're with a big publisher or not, are doing a lot of their own marketing. And social media is a big part of it. But I have disputed whether or not social media is useful for my own work in particular, our work in particular. I think that it's really, really good for self-help books and genre fiction, romance, romantasy, fantasy, you know, pure mystery like James Patterson type mystery, because you develop these niche followings. But if you're writing non-genre fiction, my experience, and I've worked hard at it for a long time, is that I don't think social media has done anything to me. Most of the time, I'm preaching to the choir. Most of the time, I'm preaching to a bunch of other authors, you know. So I don't know. I mean, it's obviously book talk. Everybody talks about book talk and how you need to market on book talk and put videos together. And I get videos from other authors every day that are from that, and I just hate them, you know. So, but that's just my personal opinion. Your thoughts?
I think we're done.
Are we done?
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, last
Dean.
question.
Do you guys both wind up writing story arcs originally before you write the actual book? Do you write story arcs? I read that somewhere that's a real necessary thing, that you have to plot everything out ahead of time. And yet I thought some writers just go say, let the work find itself.
Well, there's seat of the pants writers and plotters, and that's a very good question. Now, the short answer is I find out where the plot's going, and I leave room to say yes to directions that I couldn't have conceived of when I started. Other people want it all plotted out and structured. Famously, William Faulkner had great pieces of butcher paper on the walls of his house. If you go to Oxford, Mississippi, you can see it. And he had it down to conversations plotted out, so that then he would sit down and went over there and write it down. I like the surprise, the energy that comes off of this. And I didn't want to go over there, I wanted to go over there, but now this takes over. And I like that feeling. I like that feeling when I'm writing.
And books take their own direction, characters take their own pace. I start out, as a former research scientist, I start out with an outline. And then because nobody can tell me what to do, including me, I ignore it. And I go wherever the book takes me. But I like to start out with an outline, so I kind of know where I'm going. And I very often write the end of a book before anything else. And most of the time that ending holds up. Most of the time that does end up being the ending of the book. So I kind of know where it's going.
Okay, I would like to thank you, Michael and Stephen, for a delightful couple of hours telling us all about the jazz writing. And thank you once again.